Well, the clock is ticking on a new strike by Canada Post workers. They could be on strike again starting midnight on Friday, meaning any parcels or letters you plan on sending with them or you're expecting could well be stuck in limbo.
We didn't take that decision lightly to go out onto the picket line, but there are some things, that we can't, we're not willing to give up.
It would be debilitating to the Canadian economy at a time where it just doesn't need it, and it would only worsen our financial situation.
Canada Post received strike notices from the union yesterday. Some 55,000 workers are set to walk off the job on the same day that their collective agreement expires. Now, both sides indicate they're willing to go back to the bargaining table, but they're still pretty far apart on some major issues. Now, a face you just saw in that series of clips is joining us once again. We are joined by Jon Hamilton, who's a spokesperson for Canada Post. Jon, good to see you, sir. Thank you for making time.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for having me on.
I have to say, it's a sense of deja vu, Jon, because you and I were just here not that long ago, back in December, when the last strike took place, when again, the two sides were very far apart. So why are we here again, Jon?
Well, I think you're right, Natasha. It's like an awful sequel to the movie Groundhog Day. We seem to be right back where we were just a few months ago. Just to bring everybody up to speed, everybody was ordered back to work after CUPW's 32-day national strike so that we could have an industrial inquiry commission. Both parties were part of that and presented, opportunities and challenges and things like that. That report came out on Friday. It essentially says that Canada Post is facing an existential crisis and we need to make changes. It goes beyond, collective bargaining because there's some challenges and things that need to be addressed working with the government. But there are recommendations there that should help us move forward with negotiations. And I think Canadians and our employees were looking at that process and the report, hoping that there would be some reflection and some changing. But the CUPW seems to be rinse and repeating and going back to where they were back in December. And the reality is, and the report lays it out, we need to make changes. It's 2025. Delivery has changed, and our delivery model has to change as well. But by adding more part-time employees to our full-time mix. And we can still do that while providing and protecting what's important to our employees. But we're facing an existential crisis, and further strike activity is only going to scare away more customers and have them run to the competition and impact us for the long term.
If I'm remembering details from the report correctly, it basically said Canada Post is on the verge of going bankrupt. There are major financial crises that you all are dealing with. It did suggest that perhaps day-to-day mail delivery should be cut, not for businesses. Businesses should continue to get their daily deliveries. It also said that, as you mentioned, people should be hired on a part-time basis on the weekends. But all of this, according to the union, would threaten their job security and doesn't address the major concerns of their wages. So what's your counter-argument to them?
Well, I think first, the report's recommendations are sobering and straightforward, and we fully agree. We need to make those changes, working, and doing it in a proper and a collaborative way. But in terms of, what the union is saying, our employees, and the 90 or 95% of our delivery employees are full-time. They have job security for life. Decades ago, Canada Post agreed, or there was in a collective agreement, that we would have job security. That means an employee that once they're full-time after 5 years can never be laid off. We're not touching that or making any changes to that. So I don't understand what they're saying. And what the report does is says everybody else needs to bring forward good part-time jobs. And that's what we're preparing to do so that we can offer weekend delivery, 7-day-a-week delivery for parcels. Is where our competitors are at. It's what Canadians are expecting, and we can't do that unless we pay full-time or we pay overtime. And CUPW's approach to just use full-time adds further costs, and it also means that a bunch of full-time delivery people would have to move to weekends rather than their Monday-Friday shift. We've said, let's add some part-time into the mix. We're still going to provide good jobs, but let's do that in a way that gives us some flexibility. But there is a desire by the union to just make things more complicated and more stringent and more difficult and add to that 600-page urban collective agreement. where the report clearly shows that flexibility is needed, but it can be done in a thoughtful and meaningful way. And that's what we've been proposing all along, and that's what we're going to continue to propose.
Let me ask you a couple of questions, John, about how this impacts the Canadian public. One of which is the bewilderment about why Canada Post is in such dire financial straits when, yes, people aren't sending letters to each other anymore. They're actually sending much more expensive stuff. They're sending parcels, bigger items, much more frequently, with home delivery for everything now. So where is the loss taking place financially?
Well, obviously, the mail decline is obvious to everybody. They use way less mail, and it's dropped by the billions. Parcel delivery has been on the upswing, and we were a big player. We had 62% of the market when e-commerce was really starting to get going in Canada. But after COVID, new entrants and bigger global retailers and delivery companies have flooded the market. So there's all kinds of options out there. And we're sitting there trying to compete with a delivery model based on delivering mail 5 days a week while adding some parcels, where our competitors have parcel-based delivery models that have flexibility based on the volumes, and they can provide things like weekend delivery at a lower cost than we can. So because of the inflexibility in our collective agreements, we haven't been able to compete for that business, or we've been left to the sidelines. And what the report says and what we've been saying is, we can reach every Canadian like no other delivery company can, but we need to provide the same level of convenience and expectations that Canadians have of any other delivery company. And as it stands right now, we can't. And unless we get that done quick, our core business and the parcels are going to continue to go to the competition.
John, very quickly, for Canadians who have parcels in the mail right now, they're either going to receive them or they're sending them. If the strike does happen on Friday, what's going to happen?
Well, that's up to CUPW in terms of what they want to do with their strike notice, but we're going to continue to deliver and continue to provide a service. But it's going to be hampered. And if you have an item that you can track, track it along in the process to see where it goes. But I think our message to Canadians is, we want to fix this and we want to be around for the long term. We know you do not need this, but we also can't just give up on all the changes we need to address the challenges of 2025, not 1982. We can't just give up on that to get a deal, because it will only further the death spiral we're in when it comes to holding on to the status quo, which CUPW seems to continue to want to do.
Okay, Jon Hamilton, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Natasha.
Take care. And we do want to let you know we have reached out to CUPW, the union that represents the Canada Post workers, for any sort of comment. We still welcome any chance to speak to them on air. We have not heard back from them yet. But we do have my friend and colleague Mark Harkisol, who's on set now. Mark, I'll just say forgive me if we encroached on everything you were just about to report, but we do have some sense of where Canada Post, where the union, CUPW, stands, where the workers are saying, no, this is not going to work for us and we might have to strike. What are you hearing from them? Yeah,
Natasha, no need to ask for forgiveness first off. There's a lot of information to go around in this story. But yes, as Natasha mentioned, we have reached out to the Canadian Union of Postal Workers for comment. We haven't heard back from them yet. We do have a statement that they issued yesterday, though. And the statement doesn't necessarily talk about the things like wages and job security that they've been talking about for the last 6, 7, 8 months now since this labor strife all started. But it does talk a little bit about the strike notice and why they are going ahead with that. We can confirm that a 72-hour strike notice has been issued, says CUPW. This step was taken in part to respond to the employer's recent indication that it may unilaterally change working conditions and suspend employee benefits. This step was also taken to facilitate the continuation of our right to strike that was put on pause by the CIRB in December of 2024. There is still time to return to the bargaining table. We remain committed to negotiating collective agreements and urge the employer to do the same. Now, that talk about going back to the bargaining table, that's because talks have been going on this whole time, Natasha. Let's take it back to, we're getting a lot of questions about how is this happening again? We just had a 32-day strike in November and December. You'll remember that the federal government ordered them back to work. A federal mediator was involved. The negotiations continued. It was referred to an industrial inquiry commission, and the collective agreement was extended to May 22nd, which is this upcoming Thursday. But negotiations have been ongoing since then, and they have not been fruitful. Canada Post last week announced that it was going to take a temporary pause from talks, and that's why the union is talking about going back to the bargaining table. But right now, you see the situation we're in. There's been absolutely no advancement. Talking to Jon Hamilton, as you just did, it sounds like things have actually fallen further back. And now we have a strike deadline coming up, potentially with a strike on Friday at midnight.
So one of the things I was speaking to Jon about was about that report that came out last Friday, and it just gave us such a grim picture of where Canada Post stands right now and where it might be headed in the future. What's your best analysis on that?
It didn't look good, and where it might be headed is a lack of existence in the near future, according to this report anyway. The report talks about an $845 million operating loss taken by Canada Post a couple years ago in 2023, and each and every situation that pops up from then is not helping. The report says that Canada Post faces an existential crisis. It highlights suggestions like phasing out daily door-to-door letter mail delivery for individual homes, but keeping it for businesses, as you mentioned earlier, shifting focus to parcel delivery to compete with private couriers like DHL, UPS, etc., renegotiating labor agreements with the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, which is what's happening right now, and lifting moratoriums on rural post office closures and community mailbox conversions. Now, CUP W has looked at that report. They've commented on it. They dismissed it. They said all it does essentially is parrot Canada Post talking points, and they don't find it valid at all.
Okay. Mark Carcassell, thanks so much, Mark.
Thank you.